Robert O'Neill, the Navy SEAL who put one in the head and two in the chest of Osama bin Laden, said that his SEAL team were all certain they weren't coming back. They were going on a mission to kill Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, and they knew they weren't coming back alive. And he said his point man asked them before they went, "If we know this is a suicide mission, why are we going?" And Robert O'Neill said to him, on a Tuesday morning, a single mom, 25-year-old single mom, dropped her daughter off at school. And 45 minutes later, she was jumping from the World Trade Center. She was jumping to her death because it was better than being burned alive. And he said in her last act of human decency, she held her dress shut so no one seen her underwear, and then she splattered on the ground. He said she was innocent. She didn't choose to be in this fight. We chose to be in the fight. And they all went, and by the grace of God, they came back. And they killed our arch enemy, Osama bin Laden. My daughter mentioned to me earlier today that aside from our wonderful deacon this morning telling his experience of 9/11, she really hadn't heard much about it, not much on social media. She said it seems like people have forgotten. And it struck me because I remember that day we said, we'll never forget. Never forget. Tell your children, your grandchildren, never forget. So I just want to remind everybody, 21 years ago, people that hated us because they hated our way of life, they hated our freedom, attacked us and killed nearly 3,000 innocent American men and women. And they thought that was going to stop us from being free. And it did not. They underestimated the American. They underestimated America. You see, I remember shortly after that, George Bush with a bullhorn talking to a crowd of people, firemen, policemen, construction workers, civilians, just regular New Yorkers, just average New Yorkers. And you could hear a pin drop until he said, "Hey, can you guys in the back, can you hear me?" And they said, "Yeah, we could hear you." He said, "Good, because the people who did this are going to hear all of us really soon." And it burst out in shouts. And think about that. A Republican president in the midst of the bluest Democrat state in the Union had their undivided attention and then got them cheering in unity. How did that happen? Because when we got attacked, that day and for years, I would say 8 years later, we had a spirit of unity. We didn't look at each other as black, white, Hispanic Americans, Italian Americans, a Republican, a Democrat, a red, a blue. We looked at each other as fellow Americans, and we were united to stand for what we believed. We were united in freedom. And I can tell you what went wrong after those 8 years and why we're so divided now, but this video isn't about that. This video isn't about what's wrong with America. This video is about what's right with America. You see, 343 firemen ran up when everybody else was running out. They ran in to save lives, and they never came out. They left children, husbands, wives, moms, and dads. 71 police officers also ran in and never made it out. After that, there wasn't a cop or a fireman that could buy himself a drink in the bar because everybody in that bar would say, "The drink's on me, brother." When cops in New York City walked down the street, they were cheered. They were cheered. They were giving gifts. The parents of the kids said, "Look at that, that's a hero." When firemen, the same thing. Even blue-collar construction men got cheered when they went to take away all that rubble and rebuild that area that the enemy thought he destroyed. Thought he destroyed the American spirit, but the American spirit was revived. You know, Flight 93, let's never forget Flight 93. Todd Beamer was on the phone with his wife, and she said, "Hey, they're ramming planes they rammed the plane into the World Trade Center. And then shortly after that, he was hijacked. His plane, Flight 93, was hijacked. And somehow he got through to the FBI, and they were on the phone with him telling him what was going on. And the FBI dispatcher said he heard Todd Beamer lead several men in the Our Father prayer before he said, "Let's roll." And they tried to take the plane back when they couldn't. So they went down with the plane, but they saved countless other Americans, because they were going to fly that plane into another building. They were going to fly that into another building of innocent people. And we've seen a sacrificial American spirit reborn when Petty Officer Mansour in the Navy SEAL, Petty Officer Mansour, seen a hand grenade. I think it bounced off his chest and went on the ground. And without hesitation, he dove on it to save his fellow SEAL's life, and he died. We've seen Pat Tillman, an NFL great football player, turn down like a $5 million contract to enlist in the Army Rangers and give his life for our country. We knew the American fighting man, the policeman, the fireman, these were heroes. We knew whether you were black, white, Asian, or Hispanic, you were my brother, you were my sister, you were a fellow American, and I respected you just for that. But something changed. Something changed. I remember that day, the Giants came running out on the field, and every New York Giant was holding an American flag. Michael Strahan led them. They stood at attention with some of them saluting the flag, tears coming out of their eye. There was unity. We loved the flag. We loved the symbolism that flag meant, freedom for all of us. And what happened? Now our young people hate cops. They hate the American flag. They won't even stand for it. They disrespect it. They spit on it. They burn it. They won't even stand during the Star-Spangled Banner. And again, I'm not going to tell you what I think went wrong, but I'm going to tell you what's right. And we need to teach this to our children. We need to teach this to our grandchildren. On that 9/11 day, the enemy tried to take away our freedom, and they didn't. They failed. They failed. The reason they failed is because the American spirit lives in each of us, and we love freedom. And that American flag stands for freedom. That American flag stands for unity. The reason we stand for the American flag came out of tragedy also. In 1918, during World War I, it was a point where the country was just in a malaise. The New York Times reported it was the first game of the World Series, Chicago Cubs versus the Boston Red Sox, and people were just down. It wasn't like a normal World Series game. People were down because the week before, the government announced that they would be drafting some Major League Baseball players to the war. It was just a very depressing time in America. And during the seventh inning stretch, the Navy band started playing the Star-Spangled Banner. And second baseman Fred Thomas of the Boston Red Sox took his hat off and put it over his heart and stood at attention and faced the American flag, and tears came out of his eyes. And every player on both teams did the same thing. Then the crowd got all quiet and hats came off. People standing at attention, people putting their hand over heart. Everybody stood at attention and honored our American flag, because that was our way of honoring the men and women that were being killed overseas. That was our way of showing the world we are united. We are the United States of America, one nation under God. And when the song finished playing, the New York Times reported that the crowd broke out in jubilee. They started throwing their hats up, hugging each other. Chicago Cubs fan hugging Boston Red Sox fans, the players hugging each other. And it brought unity and joy and sense of purpose. Yes, we're fighting for the freedom of the world. We're the greatest country in the world. We're going to win this. And sure enough, we won it. In less than a year later, America declared victory. And that caught on. Every baseball game, they started doing it at the beginning of the game, and every football game. That's why we do it. This is why we do it. But who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner? Why was it even written? It was the War of 1812. And a young lawyer named Francis Scott Keyes was given the assignment to do a prisoner swap. So he went aboard a British ship. And he said to the captain, hey, well, I want to do this prisoner exchange. We have some of your prisoners at Fort McHenry right here, and you have some of our prisoners, swap for swap. And he said, you know, the captain of the ship said, Francis, this isn't going to matter. He's like, what do you mean it's not going to matter? He goes, look over the horizon. And Francis looked, and dozens of British ships were coming. And he said, on my command, we're going to bomb that fort and keep bombing until you surrender. And Francis says, you can't do that. There's women and children in that fort. You can't do that. And he said, well, I've already sent a messenger. And he said, if you see that flag over the ramparts right there, when we see that flag lower, we'll stop bombing, and that means you surrendered, and we're going to take you all as our prisoners. You see, this was the War of 1812. It wasn't too long after America humiliated the King of England. The King of England. We said, no king but Christ, and we're going to rule ourselves. And the king thought this was a dumb experiment. It never happened in human history we would fail. But we didn't fail. And we beat him. And he was really miffed about this. And they wanted to destroy us. They were coming back with a vengeance. So the captain said, you can go talk to the prisoners if you like. So he went down, and the prisoners were all in chains. And he said, listen, guys, this is what's going on. They're going to start bombing the fort. And if the guys in the fort lower the flag, that's it. We're all prisoners. So the guy said, well, Francis, let us know what happened. So he went up there, and the bombing began. And they kept bombing and bombing. And the prisoners yelling, Francis, did they lower the flag? And he's like, no, the flag hasn't been lowered yet. And they kept bombing and bombing. The flag still hasn't been lowered. So the captain, getting so aggravated by the middle of the night, said, aim all the cannons at the flag. We'll just take this freaking flag down, and then we'll take the fort. And he just kept bombing and bombing. And then it got really dark. And the prisoner's like, Francis, is the flag still standing? He's like, it's too dark, I can't see. And all through the night, the bombs burst in the air, and they're just bombing and bombing this flag. And then finally, when the sun started to rise, they said, Francis, is the flag still standing? And Francis says, yes, the flag still stands. And he said he overheard the captain say to one of the sailors, how is that bloody flag still standing? And so the sailor looked with his telescope and said, Captain, it's being held up by dead Americans. He's like, what? He's like, it's being held up by dead Americans. He's like, what do you mean? He said, there's Americans piled 30 bodies high, and there's a man on top holding the flag. Apparently, every time the man holding that flag up would get killed, someone would step on his body and keep that flag standing. And Francis Scott Key said he remembered in that moment hearing George Washington say, the Christian American would rather die on his back than live on his knees. You see, we stand for the flag because from the very beginning, it's been held up by dead Americans. Dead Americans at Fort McHenry, dead Americans in Iraq, dead Americans in Afghanistan, dead Americans in Iwo Jima, dead Americans in Japan, Germany. Our flag still stands because of dead Americans. So please teach your children to love our flag, to love our country, and to love their neighbor as themselves. God bless, and God bless America.